Hi everyone and welcome to my guide for the reworked Raekor Barbarian with Boulder toss. This is a build that Blizzard has reworked in patch 2.73, season 26, and it used to be played with Hammer of the Ancients, but there are 3 different sets on Barbarian that used Hammer of the Ancients, so I decided to remove one of them and give us this instead. Back to the roots for Raekor. So this is the so-called charge Barb or the charge set, and it also used to have this Boulder toss, but that kind of fell out of favor, and now we're back to it. I have played this build a lot on the PTR, and we don't have the final patch notes yet, so there is subject to change for some things here, but if there's gonna be any noteworthy update, I'll leave a comment that pinned at the top of the comment section so you can check it out. And in case there are some huge changes, I might remake the guide, but I don't think so. This build is going to be one of the top tier Barbarian builds going forward. With the rework, they usually try to also make a build pretty strong, and it actually turned out to be quite strong. So you can push competitively on your overall Barb leaderboards with this against Whirlwind Rend and also Elodie Hoda. So it seems to land somewhere in the same line of builds for Barbarians. Now, Barbarians don't have like the strongest pushing builds in the game, but they are all 3 fairly solid. And Raekor is also really good for farming actually. So I tried this on the PTR a lot as well, and I'm gonna show you a farming setup. And with that, you have a new top tier farming build for the Barbarian that is actually very competitive with some of the other classes' top builds as well. I would rank Barbarian as a solo farming character somewhere in like probably top 3 of all classes, behind the Monk and the Crusader. Since season 26 doesn't give us a power up like the Ethereals or the Soul Shards used to do in the last few seasons, we don't really expect very easy 150 clears. In fact, I believe that the very first 150 clears of anyone will not happen before 5,000 or 6,000 Paragons. And I guess it will be kind of similar for the Raekor Barb, maybe a bit higher. So it is a fairly good build, and there's definitely a lot of different little skill elements involved, because it is rather squishy, and it also has a low life mechanic where you deal more damage. So this is something that especially experienced players will gain an advantage from over time when they find all the little tricks. Anyway, let's jump into the setup here. We have the reworked Raekor set. This is based around Furious Charge and Ancient Spear, which has the Boulder Toss rune. So first of all, you get a charge when you hit only one enemy, and you gain all runes for your Furious Charge, which includes one that resets the cooldown when you hit enemies. So the idea is that you charge back and forth all the time to stack up this 6-piece bonus multiplier, which gives you 5,500% extra damage for your Ancient Spear. And then you throw your Boulder Toss when you reach full fury, which usually also happens after a single charge when you have enough enemies around. So there are a bunch of runes on Furious Charge that do something here. We have the cooldown reduction, we have the 10 additional fury for each enemy hit, and you also have a freeze, and you have 3 charges. So that when you miss a charge, or you can also use it just for mobility, going into nowhere, you are actually quite mobile on this build. And the main ability here is the Boulder Toss. This uses all your fury to throw a big rock, and it increases in power the more fury you have. So you want to hit full fury and then throw it. And there's also some other supporting legendaries that buff it. So first of all, we have the Scholar's Salvation, gives you simply more damage, and also even more damage when you hit only a few targets. So it is quite nice against bosses and some elite packs that you can just finish off more easily like this. And you also have Ariad's Law and the 300th Spear, both of which give a massive damage buff. So on both these weapons we have plus 200% damage to Weapon Throw and Ancient Spear. The Weapon Throw part does not really matter anyway, it's mostly cosmetic, so we care about the Ancient Spear. And on top of this though, you get a Weapon Throw attack speed. And you have another mechanic that gives your Weapon Throw the ability to increase your maximum fury cap beyond the typical by 200. So usually you have 100 fury, you get 50 from Paragons, and then you can get 20 from a passive and maybe have a roll and an item or so. But usually 150 is your cap, and you can go to 350, which synergizes with this Boulder Toss rune, so you have an even bigger rock. Now, when you're typically playing in like a push scenario, like you can see here, weapon throw is not actually used very much. So you usually use it for pulling, or sometimes you can stack a bit of Bane of the Stricken on a yellow elite to soften it up for the fight, so that it simply takes more damage. You can just, take like 5 or 10 seconds, throw a few weapons because it have this super high attack speed. And obviously on the boss, this is where this really shines. So on the boss, you have this super fast string stacking all the time. You can reliably hit the boss, and you can stay at range instead of charging through the pull all the time because there's no pull. And like this, you build the Raekor 6-piece stacks, you build this higher fury mechanic, and you build Stricken at the same time. And you can actually destroy bosses in the right circumstances. So this is the basic concept of how to use your skills. You charge through the pulls, get the stacks, get your fury, throw the boulder, and on few targets or single target, you throw the weapons until you have full fury, and then you throw the boulder. And you do this rinse and repeat. There are a lot of supporting items that help you out in damage and toughness. So first of all, Band of Might is a requirement. This set right now doesn't have any damage reduction on the set itself. So you need to bring your own toughness, and quite a lot of it, because else you're not gonna survive. So you can see here I have an esoteric alteration in the standard setup. On the high end of the leaderboards, you're not gonna see this gem. People are gonna play with an offensive choice, which is Zaze. But I believe that especially for beginners and especially for lower paragons, this is gonna be a pretty solid option. Alternatively, this is actually something I have done quite successfully on the PTR. You can actually run with a shield. Now, I have done a video about this already, but the main idea behind this is that you have the Crimson set, which synergizes with resource cost reduction, and there's a sword and board passive, which gives you 20 resource cost reduction and 30% damage reduction. So this synergizes together for a lot of toughness, and like this, you're gonna become a real tank. So you can even drop Esoteric again, or you can even keep it, and you're gonna be almost immortal. Now, the reason why you want to have quite a lot of toughness and not play like super ranged playstyle all the time is because of this 4-piece bonus. On the 4-piece, it says that for every 1% life you're missing, you deal 2% extra damage with Boulder Toss. So the idea is you want to be at low life as much as possible. And there is one really great way to do this. And this is the synergy between Captain Crimson and the Relentless passive, which is going to be your main defensive mechanic to make use of this extra damage here. So Relentless says that under 35% life, you take 50% less damage and you have 50% resource cost reduction. And this again synergizes with Captain Crimson to give you another 50% damage reduction. So in total, you get ×4 your toughness while at 35% or less life. So it is rather easy to stay at low life and use this extra damage effect once you have reached its relentless range. And luckily we even have a UI indicator on the bar. What this also means is that when you're at 35% life, you actually have more HP than when you're at full life. So you kind of want to be at this low range. But on the other hand, when you are just slightly above 35% life, you don't have this massive damage reduction yet. You might actually just get blasted straight through it to death. So you have to kind of balance out your total life pool, your total toughness, and try to find like a good way that works so that it can take enough damage, but not too much, especially when you are just outside of relentless range. And this is again where Esoteric Alteration comes in, because Esoteric first of all gives you massive damage reduction, especially against elites, and also gives you even more Ores when you are below half-life. So it kind of eases your way into this relentless range by giving you earlier damage reduction, which then allows you to get into relentless range with a lot of HP left and become super tanky. So this is the main idea here. Other supporting defensive options are the Ancient Parthen Defenders. So you could also experiment with other item choices here, especially Aquila Cuirass or potentially even Shimizu. Not in the sense that you roll off all your crit chance, but just to sometimes get some extra damage, especially at higher paragons. I expect this might become a choice. And we also have Ignore Pain. Ignore Pain is another quite useful defensive cooldown, gives you crowd control immunity and 50% damage reduction. So this is also something that helps you to ease your way into relentless range. So it really comes down to using it at the right moment. You have to see what's going on. You have to see, are there arcane beams? Are there fire chains? Are there a lot of enemies starting to hit you? And then you press this button while dropping lower and lower in HP until you are in relentless range. and then you are typically kind of safe as long as you can sustain your life a little bit. For starters, the Templar is a great way of doing this. So Templar just has passive life regeneration and also throws a heal your way sometimes, which helps you to get a lot of recovery, which is great. But you can also do it with just a life per hit roll on the weapon or on Bracer or something like that. The other passives go towards mostly offensive choices. So here's Boon of Volcators, which gives you more after Berserker uptime, which is great. This is usually your main time to nuke. And also Berserker Rage is 25% multiplicative damage bonus. And this actually works for throwing the rocks when you're full fury, and you get this damage buff all the way until they impact, which is amazing. There are also other choices, especially Rampage is really great. So if you want to drop one of the defensive ones, especially Nurse of Steel, I guess, you can go with Rampage, which is amazing, especially also for farming. And there are also some other options if you want to go really all in, but I wouldn't recommend dropping Relentless. Now, you might be wondering, why is there Endless Walk in this build when it's like charging around all the time? But usually you try to do very short charges, so you actually keep up this Endless Walk buff on damage instead of defense most of the time. Obviously, this is nothing you really want to do in speed farming, where we change up the setup a little bit because you constantly go fast and go very large distances. But for pushing, where it's a very slow-paced playstyle, it is totally fine with this Endless Walk. And if you really need the extra toughness because there's lots of very dangerous elites around, you can actually keep it on the defensive side by moving around more and charging a bit further. And this way, you'll actually be a bit more tanky as well on demand. And talking about speedruns, so here's some footage about this, and I'm also going to show you the setup. We changed up a few things here. For example, you don't really have to play around this low life mechanic. You don't really have to play around this Relentless, so you can drop this entirely. But most importantly, you're gonna be a bit in trouble when it comes to refilling your resources. And there is a solution to that, and it's the Call of the Ancients. So the idea here is that you stack as much cooldown reduction as possible, and we go with a Messerschmitt's Reaver in the cube in speedruns. And if you keep up the pace, you can rather easily keep up both your Wrath of the Berserker and the Call of the Ancients permanently throughout the entire run, as you can see here. I have no trouble resetting my skills if I get enough killing blows in a given time. And it's also not like a really strict requirement. So even if you drop the buff here and there, it's not like the run is gonna end suddenly. You can just go around, charge a few more times on the next pull, and you're gonna be okay until it comes back. So this actually works really well. I've tried many different setups, and this was by far the most smooth. And it made it a quite simple, basically one button build. You just have to keep up your buffs, charge around a little bit, and that's almost about it. I combined this here with a Squirt's Necklace with Molten Wildebeest Shield, so that you have this buff pretty much permanently. Sometimes you get a shield pile as well, so it's super easy. And other times you can take like a hit or two and keep the shield, and you keep the buff. So this is amazing. And for the ring slot that we open up from the Endless Walk set, I chose Convention of Elements. There is also Storm of Jordan, or if you really want, there's Unity to get extra toughness and protect your Squirt Shield even better. But I felt Convention was actually the best, because sometimes you might not really be in like the greatest spot to fight the Rift Guardian. And when you don't actually stack Stricken on the boss, because you don't have it here in speedruns, and sometimes they're like too spread out, it can take a few throws to actually finish them. And then having the Convention of Elements is really useful to just blast down the boss, sometimes in one go. So usually for the rest of the run, I don't really care much about the Convention. Sometimes it's some extra free damage boost. It's not like I'm playing around it in any way. Just on the boss, if I know that it's coming in a few seconds, I preserve my fury and then I throw a big rock. Other than this, the setup doesn't really change all that much. So you can choose to one weapon throw in sort of farming as well, but it's not really that useful because most of the time you have the Ancients doing the job for you. But again, for example, if you don't want to go Convention, you can go weapon throw instead of Warcry, and you can kill the boss quite easily with this in a matter of seconds anyway. One thing that's important to highlight though is that when you're farming, you always have to accumulate a few stacks at the start of the run. So especially when you start out, you don't want to just blast down the first pull immediately. But when you find like the first like 5 to 10 enemies or so, you just charge through them like 3, 4, 5 times. It takes like 2 seconds. But this will make sure that you have enough Raekor stacks to actually keep throwing those rocks. Because every time you throw a rock, you consume 5. and most of the time you will not really be charging through many enemies for the rest of the run. Good thing is you can also make use of some of the other passives on the Barbarian, so there's no escape, for example, which gives you up to 30% multiplicative damage bonus when you're at least 15 yards away, and this is actually not very much. This is roughly this range between my character and the boss right now. So you get the effect fairly often on almost any target. And you're also going to see some people even using this while pushing, even when they're mostly in a close range playstyle. I quickly want to highlight also a T16 setup, which works fairly similar. So if you want to do some kind of Raekor action in T16, I can recommend this setup with Harpoon. The main reason to use Harpoon instead of Boulder Toss is that you can pull the loot to you and immediately loot the Death Breath and legendaries from the elites you're going to kill. You can also do this with Boulder Toss. I wouldn't really recommend it though, because you have way overkill damage, and you can add, some extra quality of life mechanics like Unforgiving. You can use Animosity passive for more fury. Sprint just to speed it up a bit. Typically not the greatest T16 build, I guess. On the Barb you have Whirlwind, which can go really fast, but here you have Furious Charge, you have a lot of damage, you can one-shot every single pack, so it also works quite well. So this is pretty much it for the different setups of this guide, but there's one last thing I want to highlight, which is this boulder spread mechanic from the 6-piece bonus. So you hit one enemy with a boulder, and then on successfully hitting something, you will spread this boulder into another 5 boulders, and they will fly out in like a random kind of cone line AoE in front of you. But the distance they go is random, and also the exact angle of each of them. So they can overlap sometimes a lot, sometimes they fly really far. So your damage is overall quite inconsistent. And if you combine this together with bloodshed procs from Battle Rage and with this low life mechanic where you deal more damage sometimes or less damage sometimes, you can get quite varying degrees of burst damage. This doesn't matter all that much in pushing, but especially when you're farming, you have to kind of keep an eye out for what is actually taking how much damage, because sometimes you just completely obliterate an entire screen, and sometimes you throw like 3 boulders and 4 boulders on a little blue pack and it still doesn't die. So this is always something to keep an eye out for. I'll show this here in slow motion so you can see the boulders spreading into this cone AoE. And there's also one other thing, and that is that you can actually shotgun enemies when they're standing next to walls. So I couldn't find a clip of this, but the idea is quite simple. You have an enemy standing in front of a wall, and you throw towards that enemy from somewhere further away, and all those boulders that will usually spread out into this cone AoE will actually all hit that one target. So this is something to abuse, especially for solo pushing, especially for Rift Guardians. I believe this can really speed up some kills. If you get the right Rift Guardian in a little corner next to a wall, you can completely annihilate them in some cases. So whenever you see an opportunity to do this, you should do it, because it will massively improve your damage, even if it takes you a few seconds to set it up. And this also concludes this guide here. So hope you enjoyed it, and I wish you good luck in Season 26, especially if you're playing Barbarian. Personally, this is going to be my season starter. I want to play this build. It is fairly solid for farming, and it also works really well in pushing. So I'm quite excited to try something new here and see how far we can get. Hope you enjoyed this video. For more tips and guides, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.